I'm Matt O'Brien. I'm a Wall Street analyst at Piper Sandler. Like she mentioned, been covering the space for about 20 years now, or it's coming up on 20 years. But I'm more of a movie critic. I just kind of sit back and then assess what's happened versus what you guys are all doing, which is developing manufacturing and selling products to treat patients, and what the panel's up here doing as well. So, their feedback's going to be a lot more interesting about the space than what I think. This is Brady, Kurt, Rebecca, and Eric in that order here. And so I'll just run through some of these questions and have you guys touch on some of these topics. I think it's going to be really interesting. So let's go ahead and jump in, and maybe we start with you, Brady. Just, everybody's talking about the COVID environment and the pandemic, and I think what everybody's trying to get their head around is just on the volume side, the durability of the recovery that we're seeing here in the U.S. or even globally. What are you seeing? Maybe through the end of the first quarter, or whatever you're comfortable commenting on publicly on the situation.
First of all, Matt, I would say that's a horrible question to ask right off the top, because it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to answer. I think what we saw in the first quarter was kind of what we all expected. Really ramping through the quarter, and without saying more than I should. What I would say is the thing that has been strange to me as I've watched it is, one, seasonal norms are not really in play. Two, certainly regionally different places around the world are up and down. Like right now, I'm sure most everyone here is aware of that. You still look at like ANZ is still a really difficult space with elective surgery kind of barely going. But even in the second quarter, as it's played through, what we've historically seen in different periods, different even weeks of a period, which are very predictable historically in recon, have been very strange and have changed. And so I think that's where we'll be through most of the rest of the year. Some of it is COVID resurgence. Some of it is staffing. Some of it is just I've seen more surgeons take vacations earlier this year than I've ever seen in my career. So there's just a lot of things that are a little odd right now. And I actually do think, though, that guys in your role and others that I see out here have it pegged right. That I really do think it'll have better than a normal coverage this year, and that there will be some tailwind from COVID as long as we keep working towards a better staffing environment in the second half.
Got it. Okay. So Kurt, maybe just to expand on that a little bit, as you talk about we think about all these pressures that are impacting the space, from supply chain to staffing, inflationary pressures. What are the ones that are more acute that you can get over quickly versus some that may be more durable as we look out, the end of this year and even next year?
Yeah, I think in similar comment to what Brady said, the environment, if you go back to the first quarter of 2020, COVID hit, everything just shut. And that was actually, in hindsight, pretty straightforward. As things have unfolded, the totality of the environment has gotten more variable, whether it's staff shortage, whether it's inflation, logistics, supply chain constraints. In some cases, supply chain is being impacted by COVID, keeping the workforce out of the facilities. So as you look at all these different variables, and you're trying to handicap which one can we work our way through, it almost feels today organizations globally understand how to deal with COVID. They understand when a portion of their workforce is sick and can't produce, can't show up, they can deal with it. The bigger factor from my chair right now is the supply chain and global logistics, and how that is playing on everybody's capabilities. And I'll give some real life examples. Simple things that we always took for granted are now way elongated in the supply chain process and in supply chain delivery. And there's a little bit of clarity out on the horizon, but not perfect clarity. So our organization, I assume all other organizations, are having to put a lot more focus, not just daily, but it almost feels like hourly, in connecting with all the supplier bases, not only your tier 1, but tier 2, tier 3. It's great, you got everything on the shelf, and a tier 3 supplier disappoints you and you can't build anything. So that supply chain and global logistics piece, to me, remains the one that we're spending a tremendous amount of time on, and is the one that, I don't see that as just being over the horizon. It's going to take a little longer to get that sorted out.
Got it. Okay, thanks for that. And then Rebecca, you're running the spine business at ZimV. What are you seeing, from a spine perspective in terms of volumes? Are things getting better? I've got low back pain. That's not fun. You need to get it treated a lot more acutely than you would maybe. I've got some shoulder issues. I'm just a mess, and I'm, going to be a customer for all you pretty soon. But what are you seeing from a spine perspective as far as volume recovery and canceled cases? Is it just COVID related? Hey, somebody shows up and they're positive. What are you seeing in that sector specifically?
Yeah, so first of all, I think very consistent with the comments that have been shared so far. It's very strange, and it's something that we haven't experienced before in terms of just the volatility. And we'll see recovery, and we think things are kind of starting to stabilize, and then we'll get hit certain regions, as everybody has mentioned. It's just been very unpredictable. What I would say about spine, which I think is a little bit unique to the whole orthopedic space, is that it starts off as a lifestyle, a quality of life issue. And a lot of times people can push off living with, numbness in their hands for a time. But very quickly it does escalate to a point where it's more than just a quality of life procedure. It truly becomes debilitating in many cases. And so I think in that regard, even within the spine space, there are certain segments that have been more robust than others as we've kind of navigated through this. So the more complicated procedures tend to be prioritized, and we see those bouncing back much more quickly than the more basic procedures that people feel like they can live with. And then I think related to that, there's also, because of inflation and just kind of the state of the economy in general, we see people pushing off procedures for a longer time period if it's not yet to that point where they're in severe pain. So we're definitely seeing kind of some prolonged softness in some of the procedure volume for issues that maybe don't even necessarily directly relate back to COVID. So it's been a very interesting couple of years. I share the comments of the rest of the panelists, and we're just trying to figure it out and take it as it comes. So in general, we're seeing it recover, but it's definitely been a rockier road than I think I personally would have expected at this point, 2 years into this pandemic.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Appreciate that. Eric, you led K2 through the integration at Stryker and then ran Stryker's spine business during the pandemic. How did that impact the integration? And then what were you seeing as you were at Stryker as far as the pandemic goes and coming out of it?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to be here. It's wonderful. We're all back together. To be able to be in person, and that kind of leads to that discussion. All of us are eager to get back together at a meeting like OMTEC, because separate from Zoom and Teams and how to work in what we've learned in a COVID environment, we want to come here because so much gets done around these tables and on the floor. And it's the same thing in a business environment. So what happened quickly with us, we were going through an integration, pretty large global integration in 2019. It was quite intense, bringing two cultures together, and then COVID hits. And how do you run a business or integrate a business in the face of COVID? So we pivoted over to Teams, and we're living on Teams day in, day out. And what's interesting going forward, in the group talking earlier here at breakfast, was how are companies going to function going forward? When we're hiring people that want to work from home, a new generation that want to work from home, COVID has driven that. And yet I firmly believe, and I think a lot of people around the room, that I'll go back to what I said, a lot of work gets done around the, in person, around the table in person versus in a virtual environment. So Stryker pivoted over. Our supply chain people, our operations people have been there almost from the beginning. They haven't left. Our R&D, our sales and marketing, our G&A, had moved over more into this virtual environment. They're still working very much in a virtual environment, but we're starting to see some change in coming back together. It'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. What I'm hearing, not only from my former colleagues at Stryker, but from a lot of the other companies I'm working with, is everyone's trying to kind of test the waters on what this future is going to look like. There's going to be a larger component of virtual. My personal belief, however, is that we are going to still be coming together and working in person, because that's where R&D happens. The reason you're having your biomechanics, burgers, and beer, and you're doing it in person, is because you want to sit around together and talk about these interesting topics versus sitting in a Zoom at home, right? So I think that translates into everything we do on how we try to run a business and build a culture.
Got it. Okay. So this next question is probably more for Rebecca and Brady for starters, but you're both at spin-offs right now from larger organizations. How critical is partnering with contract manufacturers at this stage of your life cycle as a new spin-off, and what challenges do you see as you're working with these new partners as you're an independent company? And maybe Rebecca, we'll start with you.
Sure. So first of all, not unlike acquiring and integrating a company, it's also a very interesting time to spin off a company in the middle of a pandemic. So when we announced that we were spinning off our spine and dental divisions, that was in February of last year. So we were smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, and trying to build a new company and an identity, as well as create that culture and that momentum virtually, is very, very difficult. So I share the sentiment that getting people back together in person is just a critical component of who we are as human beings, and I think never more important than when you're trying to start up a new company, essentially. As it relates to contract manufacturing and how we've been working with our supply chain partners throughout all this, it's interesting because we have the history with Zimmer Biomet and those legacy relationships, and in many times legacy partnerships. So we've been spending a lot of time assessing every individual partnership, essentially to say, where do we need to maintain this? And then where do we need to look at things a little bit differently? Because we no longer have the scale of a Zimmer Biomet-sized organization, which makes things at times a little bit more challenging, but it's also provided us some great flexibility to kind of look at things from a fresh perspective. So going through all of this in the middle of a pandemic with the supply chain challenges I think we're all aware of has been really interesting, but we are coming out of it with a very clear perspective on what we need from our supply chain partners to set us up for success. And that's allowed us to think a lot more flexibly and have conversations and start setting things up for not just what we need today, but where we're going to take this company. So it's been an interesting journey. We've learned a lot, but I think we are well on our way, thanks to the solid relationships that we have kind of throughout the world for the various parts and pieces that we're pulling together, not just for spine, but for our dental division as well.
Got it. And Brady, same question for you, but maybe a little more color just on the predicting things in this environment, which can't be easy. How do you work with your contract manufacturers to think about planning and process and future growth?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, first I'd say, Matt, we really spun out an industrial segment of our business, and there was no connection between the two sides. And so whichever way it spun, this was DJO historically, and so that is maintained as it was. Now, I would say also, though, we acquired 7 companies in 2 years, and so there's a lot of contract manufacturing involved in that, a number of new partners that we're now working with that we were not working with before. But to your question, more so related to this period of time, certainly as Kurt described, we've seen some challenge in continuity of supply, which is where we've spent significant focus. We've really approached that by leaning in hard on, from commodities all the way to raw materials, and quite frankly, expanded inventory intentionally to ensure that we were prepared for a recovery properly. We have certainly had a number of our suppliers be challenged with extended lead times, which has really changed the game. So, what our team has really done is take a more aggressive approach as far as how we were forecasting, and a more aggressive approach with our partners to really align them and us together on what would be maybe a more full recovery than what is even possible, but to do so in order to get ahead of things. And I would tell you this, I know you have this question later, but I'll try not to answer a future question, but probably the thing that we've had the most challenge with during this time, and this is less about our orthopedic implant business and more just broadly across DJO, has been really being single threaded, whether it's having only one vendor on a particular product, or having only one of our manufacturing locations, and that's been a big challenge for us. Is how do we maintain great partnerships, but also give ourselves some leverage and some flexibility by having additional partners or even additional sites of our own.
Got it. Okay, thanks for that. And Kurt, maybe I'll finish up this line of question, with you. How do you balance, you're a public company CEO, right? You have to deal with guys like me every 90 days, which is not fun. how do you balance, running the business and doing what's right for the business versus, the external public company demands that you get from a supply chain perspective, and working with the contract manufacturers and other partners to make sure you have continuity of supply, but also at the right prices in such a difficult environment?
Well, certainly, public company domain brings an extra wrinkle into the equation. You've got to be careful what you say, how you say it. And I've never heard a sell-side analyst refer to themselves as a movie critic, but it's kind of an interesting perspective you offer with that comment. I'm gonna make a statement here that I think we try to operate in a fashion that says, first, what is in the best interest of CONMED? It's not about Kurt Hartman. It's not about any of our individual employees. It's about that company, CONMED. And we try to make our decisions based on that, whether they're expansion decisions and the sales force, the marketing team, robustness and beefing up our global supply management team. Recognizing those type of investments bring expense, but we do them because we believe in the long term they're in the best interest of CONMED. And I think through the last couple of years, that has been an area of focus for CONMED, is really enhancing what we do on the supply side and the outreach with our vendors. And I mentioned, not only tier 1 vendors, but tier 2 and tier 3. And we dove into that early in COVID, thinking, okay, we'll do this for 3-6 months, however we get through this. And it's turned into a practice that we don't ever see going away. And in fact, we do more of it today and continue to hire people into that profession to truly professionalize it, which hopefully for people in this room, you can say, yeah, I've felt that, or maybe you haven't yet. But we do those things because they're in the best interest of CONMED for the long term. And I've got a great CFO, and we really think about our story before we go into those calls. And you have to do that. That's part of being a public company CEO. But all decisions start with what's in the best interest of CONMED. We approach it that way in the boardroom. We approach it that way in our business reviews and meetings. And if it's not well received by the street in any given quarter, we just keep pointing to the long term and looking at that graph on the top and the bottom. As long as we're moving the right way, I think the street over time is happy.
Yep, agreed. Okay, Eric, I'm going to bounce around a little bit here. You at K2 definitely led the charge here on the additive manufacturing side of things with what you were doing on the expandable side. So for the audience here, I'm sure they're very familiar with that, but just talk about additive manufacturing, how important it is for the orthopedic space and how important it will be going forward.
So I reflect back on 3D printing, additive manufacturing. We were early, we weren't first, but as far as a larger scale business, specifically in the spine space, we were early to embrace it. And it really helped differentiate us in the market, allowed us to look at new ways to address new geometries for the anatomy, working with physicians with new concepts and ideas. And additive manufacturing gave us a lot of flexibility as an organization, and we built out that portfolio very quickly. And part of what we were excited about when we came together with Stryker was that they had a additive manufacturing enormous facility in Ireland. And the whole concept there was for our ability to really continue to move in the space, innovate in the space, and provide that differentiation, as we know, because of not only the designs, the technologies we could create, but from a science perspective, the bony integration and the ability to get better fusion rates, right? So it was kind of fun to be ahead of the curve there. What's interesting is now listening to the physicians and what they're looking at next in the area of materials. If you reflect back, we saw titanium in the late 90s, and then the market shifted to PEEK. Then the market shifted to additive manufacturing. And we should all be watching where we are next, because I think we see that every 10 years. And it's very interesting to think what's next. We're seeing a lot of new types of materials come along, and for all of you, that's probably interesting as well to be in that space and to understand what some of those might be. So we don't know where it's going to land, but I do predict that we're going into that next phase of another material of interest that'll get momentum in the space.
If you had to guess, Eric, and I know it's tough, where do you think that's going to go? And I'd love to hear all the panelists, kind of comment on next generation materials and what kind of things they think are interesting going forward.
Like I said, I've been doing it a long time. I remember we had titanium blocks, and then we had PEEK, and everything was moving towards PEEK.
Yeah.
And then additive manufacturing allowed us to move away from, PEEK was fantastic because of the visualization, the ability to see fusion potentially, but it also wasn't good for the actual fusion, right? The imaging was great, but not the ability to get fusion. So we moved to additive. I do think we're starting to move in that space. We're seeing new compounds of combinations that are including PEEK, right? And this isn't like showing any ankle on any particular product that I'm looking at right now. I'm just seeing that a lot of those discussions when I go to the meetings, the physicians are talking about this, and that next younger generation of physicians are interested in what's next beyond additive manufacturing.
Okay.
So
Anybody
it'd be
on-
interesting for this group to just be aware of that and be ahead of, I think that curve is coming.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else on the panel that has a sense for this on the on the material side? It might be a little bit of a stretch in terms of what you're thinking about on a day-to-day basis, but anything else that you could think of that would be interesting for the group?
Man, I don't know if it's specific, but I agree with Eric. And I think if you think about the continuum of care and healthcare in general, it's getting more personalized. And more personalized from my chair is bringing what I would call some of those traditional materials that Eric mentioned in with more of the orthobiologic space. And how do you make those combination products and go down that continuum of more personalization in care? I have a bad shoulder, Brady has a bad shoulder, Matt has a bad shoulder. The surgeon opens it up, he's gonna see 3 different examples, but we give them one set of things to fix that. There may be a way to be more personalized through that combination of materials. And that's just, a bigger picture, long-term thing.
Got it.
And if I can add to that, this whole concept of patient-specific implants, we've been talking about this for years, and we talked about it on the additive manufacturing side, but it is difficult from an FDA regulatory to make sure we get it right. However, things in our industry tend to come and we can see them in the horizon, but they take longer than you think. I think where you were going there, I think this personalized medicine, we've been talking about it for a long time, but I think we're starting to get some changes in technology and ways to pre-assess those patients and use AI to look at those films. And then with groups like this to be able to learn how to make those quickly and meet those regulatory requirements, I think we're going to see a move there as part of this materials discussion.
Got it. That's really helpful. Maybe
One
sorry,
other,
go ahead,
one other
Brady.
quick add on. For sure, cobalt chrome is definitely going to continue to be under fire, and particularly in the EU, and so we will have to deal with that. And I personally think that I think we'll see more and more ceramics actually, which is not some new material, but it is a material that has a broader range, and with additive manufacturing around ceramics, I think it'll kind of open the aperture on what we can do there. The other thing I would just comment on off of what Eric said, I was trying to think of the right way to say it, but it's one thing to make patient-specific implants. It's another thing, another approach to that based on really margins from a manufacturing perspective, is making the instrumentation specific to the implant. In other words, flipping that around and having a more precise fitting of an implant based on guidance that is off the implant versus necessarily off the patient. So you can actually go both directions with that to get at the same thing.
Okay. So Brady, why the cobalt and chrome comment? What's the concern there? And then why ceramic specifically? I mean, ceramic's been around forever, but why is that going to be
So
the
I mean,
answer?
cobalt chrome has been under fire for years and years and years, based on a number of aspects, whether it be infection and predominantly it is infection. Matter of fact, most white papers would argue there's more infection out there than even presented within the industry. So, and cobalt chrome has a tendency to really attract it. So that's the single biggest driver behind it. Why ceramics? Ceramics, to me, are they've proven over time to be very durable, and as those technologies have improved to be a strong replacement that is phenomenal from an infection perspective, from a bacterial perspective. So that's why, and I think that what we've seen is you can get great bony ingrowth into a porous ceramic, and so I think it's a proven technology. But I also think, Eric mentioned like a monoblock type. I do think you'll see more combinations, whether it be biomaterials, as Kurt and Eric mentioned, or just combinations of materials like ceramics with other materials, polys with other materials, creating kind of unique monoblock systems that'll be more capable in the different implant environments.
Okay, interesting. All right, so Rebecca, talk maybe a little bit about enabling and digital technologies. I mean, we're all kind of skirting around AI and everything else like that, but what are some some new technologies that could impact the space over the next 5 to 10 years, and where do you see some of these technologies heading over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think as we talk about material innovation, and I totally agree with the comments that have been shared thus far, but I also think the real opportunity for innovation, at least speaking from a spine perspective, and frankly orthopedics as well, is beyond the implant. I think the implant technology that's out there, while it will continue to grow and evolve, I think the real opportunity for disruptive innovation lies beyond the implant, and I think it is, whether it's enabling technology or artificial intelligence, predictive analytics. If we talk about truly improving patient outcomes, I think that's where we have to go as an industry, because the implants are fantastic, they're plenty, and I think they do their job for the most part. So is there room for improvement? Of course, but the disruptive move, in my opinion, is gonna fall beyond that. I think when we talk about enabling technology, robotics is the one that everyone, of course, immediately gravitates toward. We believe there's a place for robotics, no question. I think when we talk about spine applications, it's still relatively early stage, so while it's growing very quickly, we don't yet see it kind of taking hold. Some of that is due to cost constraints, frankly. It's priced out for some of these smaller community hospitals. Certainly globally, it can be cost prohibitive. And then in the surgery center market, it's very difficult for most surgery center customers to acquire a very expensive robot. With that being said, I think bringing enabling technology to the procedure is absolutely critical as we continue to improve patient outcomes. And so what we're very focused on is bringing the right enabling technology to the right procedure, so that we're really bringing a solution that is very procedurally oriented versus producing a piece of capital and saying, hey, we believe this can help in all these various ways. So we don't think it's going anywhere. I think the next step is to determine exactly which procedures need what type of support. And I think by coupling that up and being very mindful of the cost considerations at the same time is what will allow, in spine anyway, to really move some of this innovation forward. And I think that, coupled with these artificial intelligence tools that are now becoming more readily available to help predict with a high level of confidence, because as the people have said, not all shoulders are created equal, not all spines are created equal. And so being able to take that customized, personalized approach, using data to predict with a high level of confidence how that patient should be treated and what those outcomes will look like, and then utilizing the right enabling technology to make that happen, is where I see this going.
Got it. Eric, what do you think? What's gonna be big in 5-10 years?
So my experience has said everything that she said, well, I agree with. We've been talking about predictive analytics for so long, and we've been talking about pre-op planning and how that helps us pick the right implant. As we think through that, what we've come to learn is that just everything in medicine takes longer than we think it's going to take. I remember when the robotics first came out, and they still are, but they're still early phase, right? It's still placing a screw, and it's been a long time now, and it's very exciting, and people love it, but we got so far to go before it's true AI. But that momentum, and I think we're going to talk about ASCs as well, I think both of these are perfect examples where we've been talking about predictive analytics and pre-op planning, we've been talking about robots, but we're starting to see that acceleration, that catalyst event. So I think we are now starting to see this ability of this combination of technologies. I saw a piece of software, surgeon's concept. I looked at it the other day. It was shocking to me. He uploaded films, and within 5 seconds, he could look at the angles for a deformity case. He could place, where the hip stem was going. You got these huge companies working on it, and this small innovator comes up with these ideas. So I think we're starting, and that's because the software capabilities are there now, and it's all starting to converge. So I do think we're going to see more of what you just described over the next 5 years, where we've been at this a long time, is what I'm saying. It's been a decade we've been talking about this without a lot of pull-through. And the last thing I'll say is, as I think about the technology, remember what we get paid for are the implants. So we come up with these great ideas, we'll see a great instrument, somebody will bring along a fantastic instrument or a new process or a new software, and we say, how do we get paid for it? the physician. So you need to bundle it into that whole process, into that whole cost structure, because at the end of the day, the way the DRG structures are set up, it's really hard to get paid even for these very good ideas to build a business. And that becomes interesting in this. So I've got to come in with a company and say, our predictive analytics, our robotics, our AI are so good that you're going to choose to use our implant. They've got to be integrated. They've all got to kind of work together. And I think that's starting to happen, and the market's starting to realize that.
Got it.
I think it'll reshape the implants as well.
The
I mean,
enabling technology is going to?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, most of the enabling technologies that are out there, there's no outcome change. Now, today, they may, theoretically, they're to enable repeatability and all, but there's no published data on any outcomes. But I do think if you track the entire patient journey, and where the data matters, the big data that plays into this is preoperative care, surgical intervention, postoperative protocol. When you play it across all of those, we'll make different decisions. Our customers, the caregivers, will make different decisions. And I think it'll actually reshape even not only the choices they make in implants, but it will reshape our implants as well. There's no doubt it'll play across all, but it'll be capturing end-to-end the entire patient journey to do that.
I'm sitting with a bunch of implant people, and ConMed's not, we make sports medicine implants, so they're really tiny. But we have a general surgery business, and we had a great acquisition in 2016 of a product called AirSeal. And when you have general surgery, you have to distend the abdomen, and you do that through insufflation. And the technology in AirSeal has really changed the game of insufflation. And as you look at what insufflation does, anybody had general surgery, they wake up right shoulder pain because you're putting 15 pounds of mercury pressure in the abdomen on a nerve bundle that goes to the right shoulder. Well, the AirSeal platform, we can lower that pressure. And there's this whole emerging category of enhanced recovery after surgery, ERAS protocols. And so if I can capture that data to the digital, present that data to the payer, present that data for early release, suddenly you start seeing how the data plays. Now, Eric has brought this point up a couple times, and he's spot on. Our world moves really slow here, folks. Surgeons don't change protocols really fast. Payers definitely don't want to pay for new technology. And that is what we face when we look at these really cool technologies. And I think all four of us have seen great technologies like, that's got a home. Start the clock now, maybe we'll see it in 10 years. And it's just that pathway of getting through. And if I stay on the digital side, I was on an AdvaMed call, the industry society, and they were talking about, it's a US specific comment, 5 or 7 states have put in data privacy rules, unique 5, 7 different protocols. And AdvaMed has been working on behalf of pulling out all things related to medical technology and digital and trying to keep that at the federal level. I mean, they're successful so far, but 45 more states to go. But you think about then dealing with that in your data capture in the world of medical technology, where there's already other protocols in place for patient protection and things of that nature. So it's a really long journey to get these things through and do them in a compliant way.
Got it. Yep, totally agree. So, I'll get to the ASC thing here in a second, but something that everybody's been kind of bringing up here that I think is helpful for the group is just on the inventory side of things. Your public companies, you got to run everything super lean, or otherwise everybody's like, what's going on with your inventory or AR, et cetera. Now in the pandemic, it's like, well, it's actually good to have a good, safety stock. So how different are things going to be going forward from an inventory perspective and keeping an elevated level versus where it was kind of pre-pandemic? Do you think we're going to go back to those levels, or should contract manufacturers, suppliers expect to stay elevated as far as how much they're giving you to keep an elevated safety stock level? I don't know, Brady, if you want to. You seem like you have a thought on that.
I think it'll go back to where it was.
Okay.
But I think it's probably a 3+ year journey before it's there.
More steady to get there, or do you think step functions, or?
No, it's steady.
Steady, okay.
Yeah, I would say this though. What I do think, back to what I said earlier about having some flexibility. That's where there will be unique opportunities for partnerships with us and you guys, because VMI will be talked about a lot, but we all have to be realistic about what's possible too, and whose balance sheet it sits on, and it can be pretty challenging to try to push it all there. So personally, I think it'll be 3 to 4 years, but I think it'll go back to where we were before at some point, or close.
Okay, Rebecca, thoughts?
Yeah, excuse me, I would agree with that. I think, again, as a newly spun out company, we're looking for partnerships that truly are partnerships. And so for us to take on the inventory and hold it all because we're kind of navigating through all of this together isn't necessarily something that we're looking to take on. So yes, it's important that we have that safety stock because we never want to leave a patient in the lurch. But at the same time, we can't absorb all of that, especially as a new, smaller company. And so we're looking for those partnerships that really offer that flexibility and that long-term view where we're in it together and we work it out in a way that makes sense for both parties. So I don't see us staying at these elevated levels for any longer than we need to, frankly, because it's cost prohibitive and it can be very cumbersome. So we're working toward kind of normalizing that and right-sizing it, but at the same time being very mindful that the supply chain world right now is in a bit of disarray as we continue to work through kind of the fallout from COVID and everything we're facing. But we are aiming to get back to that sense of normalcy as quickly as possible.
Okay. Eric, talk to us about ASCs. It's been talked about forever that all the volume can go from hospitals into an ASC, site of care. It makes a ton of sense. I think, COVID's probably been a catalyst for this, for a lot more cases to go into an ASC. Where do we stand today? I don't know, from a spine perspective, large joint perspective, as far as how many cases are done in an ASC setting, just generally, if you have any sense. And then where's it going? Is it going to be 50% of all cervical cases in 5-10 years? How do we think about that?
Mm-hmm. So I think it goes back to the earlier conversation that things take a long time in medicine. We've been talking about ASCs for an extremely long time. However, we thought ASCs were going to significantly move the market out of the hospitals. Hospitals were going to have problems because all the for-profit procedures were going to be taken out of the hospitals. Fast forward to where we are today, I think the momentum on ASCs are starting to really kick in now. And I think we've been talking about this for a very long time, but we're seeing more spinal procedures done in a outpatient environment. It was where we saw a movement over to just a one-level cervical. Now we're seeing multi-level cervicals. We're seeing some outpatient centers do low back cases, even do lateral MIS cases and so forth. So we're starting to see that growth. I also sit on the board of a hospital that when I talked to them in years past, they were very uptight about ASCs, and now they have partnerships where they're part owner of the ASCs and they want to spin out the ASCs and they're part owners of ASCs. So I think we've seen a significant, increased utilization of the ASC environment because of COVID. People wanting not to go into hospitals and yet still find procedural solutions. So it is an exciting time. A lot of the larger companies have initiatives focused on the space to build these out. There is still different laws within different states that have to be addressed, but I think we're going to see continued growth and see that momentum on ASCs, and COVID drove that. The economy's driving that, and I think hospitals have found a way to work with ASCs now to not look at them as a threat, but look at them as additive to their go-forward strategy.
Got it.
You
And
have
it's just,
Rebecca, you have ASC experience, right?
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely correct. Just last night I was having dinner with a surgeon that's here locally, and he was telling me he does 90% of his spine procedures in an ASC now.
Wow.
So I do think it's accelerating. I think COVID was a catalyst for sure. From my perspective, so when I was leading the ASC business for Zimmer Biomet, I took that role right about 6 months before the pandemic hit. And it was where we saw this massive acceleration leading with knees. So just to back up for a minute, historically it was foot and ankle cases, sports medicine cases, the kind of a lower risk, if you will, more simpler procedures, and everything else was kind of lagging. What's interesting is what's driving that accelerated growth is knees, hips, and spine. So if you look at the procedures that are going to move in the future, it's really those three procedures. So they're higher dollar volume, more complicated, and I think everybody's getting more comfortable with seeing this shift. I love this space, and I say this all the time, because it is truly a win-win-win for the stakeholders involved. It's better for the patient, It's better for the provider. If you're a surgeon and you're an owner operator of an ASC, once they do that, they don't want to go back to the hospital because they've got more autonomy. And it's better for the payers. So if you look at the stakeholders that are all involved here, and I agree with Eric, I think people are taking a much more open-minded approach to this now, because I think people are recognizing this is here to stay, because it just makes so much sense. Speaking as a potential patient, I know that there is no doubt in my mind where I would want to have my surgery take place if I had a choice. I also think as the healthcare consumer is becoming more educated and more informed and realizing there are options, more often people are coming in and saying, I want this type of procedure and I want it done in a surgery center. So I think we're going to continue to see the healthcare consumer drive a lot of a shift because it's so much better for the patient. So definitely think it's here to stay, and I think in terms of future volume, I think we'll see more of the more simple spine cases shift, but I think also the more complicated cases, not all of them, certainly, and there is a patient selection component that's critical here, but I do think this is something that we'll continue to see gain momentum.
I mean, just to put a finer point on that, Rebecca, cervical cases, 1 or 2 level cases, can 70% of those cases be done in an ASC setting? Lumbar, 1 or 2 level cases, can 50% of those cases be done in an ASC setting?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay.
It comes down to patient selection and the comfort level and confidence level of the surgeon. And then, of course, there are payer considerations and certificate of need. But yes, theoretically, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think as we get more comfortable with that and the patient outcomes are proving that this is completely doable and safe, that will just continue to go that way.
And Kurt, you're all sports med cases are done primarily in an ASC. I mean, what are some of the logistical challenges of an ASC versus a hospital to do a shoulder, repair case that people need to think about? And Brady, I'll get to you right after that.
Well, typically they're very procedurally focused. So if you're there and you have the equipment, the capability to cover a case, it's pretty efficient. Everything that they have said is spot on. And I'm going to switch to spine real quickly. I had a 2-level anterior cervical disc fusion done in 2016 in an ASC. I was out in 23 hours. It was done. So you should have no concern about going to the ASC. It's about the doc who's doing that case. But ASCs are very efficient, very efficient. Yes, they have less range of services. It is patient selection. You got to be careful who you bring into the ASC. But boy, when done right, it is a great model for healthcare.
Brady, what about large joints? I mean, anterior hips, so you can be out of there in no time, right? I mean, that's a great new approach. Where can that go? What challenges do you see for Enovis in terms of getting into that environment?
So, you ask what percentage is there. If you back up 2018, CMS said, okay, total knees can go to that environment. The percentages at that time across the industry were probably 2 to 3%. Higher in outpatient, but lower in ASC. If you look at the data, what everyone was saying after the end of reporting on the fourth quarter of last year, that would argue that kind of across the space, knees were about 10%. In ASCs, we're at 20, so we're a little bit higher than the market. But what I would tell you is the Aura score would argue from a patient selection perspective that in total knees that somewhere around 60 to 65% of the patients would be suitable to be done in an ASC. And so I don't know that it'll be higher than that. I hear surgeons talking about doing 70, 80% of their procedures in an ASC. I think it'll settle in somewhere in the 60s. But I would tell you where this wave is different. I was with the CEO of one of the largest health systems in the country last week. And there are the ASCs that they have ownership in that have been doing sports medicine and eyes and all for all these years. But the recon guys are out building their own, and they're not, and the hospitals are not owning them, and they're not. I think it'll play just like it did on the sports medicine side 25 years ago, where at some point the hospitals will need to buy them out or buy back in. But there's one twist I would mention on ASC that's really worthwhile to this group. And certainly, I think everyone on this panel knows this. Instrument turns are critical to all of our businesses, all of us. And it is a devastating challenge if instrument turns moves down by just a little bit. And what's happened during the pandemic and will continue as we go forward, is, a surgeon that was doing 10 cases, 10 joints, 10 total knees a week, let's say with us, in a hospital, and is now doing 3 of those cases in a surgery center or 4 of those cases in a surgery center, managing the logistics of those cases, trays, as well as implant banks for the same surgeon now in 2 facilities or 3 facilities. You really lose an efficiency piece. And so, all of us are battling and will continue to battle this instrument turns component as we see ASCs go further and further and further. I can tell you our demand for instrument sets and banks this year is significantly higher than what I've seen in the last 3 years, and it's all because of the ambulatory surgery center.
Got it. Well,
Matt, can I add to that?
Yep.
We tried forever to get to pre-op planning and had these great ideas that we would pre-op plan, we would know what sizes to take in, decrease the inventory going into the ASCs, and to address this problem. If one of the entrepreneurs in this room, the what's in it for me for all of you, we have tried so long to actually get physicians to make that shift. But the local reps want to bring in 2 pedicle screw sets. They want to bring in 2 different interbody sets. We still can't get over that hurdle. And it's there, though, and somebody will get it right. And maybe one of you in this room. But that ability to address this inventory issue by saying when you have that 2-level cervical plate, we don't have to bring in a set with 4-level cervical plates in there and multiple rescue screws and so forth. There's been companies that have come along that have tried the sterile packed approach. I still think there's an opportunity there. But how do we get the customer to do the pre-op planning to determine what sizes they need and feel comfortable that as long as you bring within the, 2 sizes above and below within what we pre-template, I'm okay. If we can do that, I think there's just someone's going to win in that space. And we're all trying, so there's no secret here. All the companies have tried it, and it's really hard to get the end customer to make it work within their workflow. So this is the perfect audience to, for someone to go home and think about how do you address that? How do we fix that? Because the inventory issue we're having that Brady just mentioned just kills the companies. When you start to get big, that amount of inventory, which you all love because we have to build more of it, but it just kills us on our balance sheet. So it's interesting, and there is an opportunity there for someone to solve that problem.
What about the pricing dynamic in an ASC versus a hospital? Is it dramatically lower? Is that another headwind? So that plus instruments is going to make it cost prohibitive from a manufacturer's or from a selling perspective?
Yeah, I will tell you that the starting point for most of these conversations is an existing surgeon, an existing customer that says, I'm now moving my business to an ASC, my reimbursement is lower, I need to be more efficient, so I need an implant price discount. That's usually where all these conversations start. And what we were doing was changing the conversation to have a more holistic discussion around balance sheets and how to be a true business partner to these ASCs. Because when a surgeon moves from a hospital setting, especially if they're a direct employee, and now suddenly they're an owner-operator, that's a whole new world for most of these surgeons. They're clinical experts, but running a business is, for the most part, not something they've ever taken on. And so it's very easy to start with, hey, your implants are too expensive, you gotta give me this price cut. That's a race to the bottom because we can't afford to take that on, plus the added complexities of the inventory, which is a very, very real headwind when you're dealing with these customers. So I think the only way that we solve this collectively is thinking very flexibly and differently about what these customer requirements are, because they are very different. So our conversations would quickly pivot to more of a holistic, let's talk about your profitability, let's talk about where you have waste. And I used to say this all the time, it always came down to storage, sterilization, and staff. Those are their 3 biggest areas of cost. And so if we can help them cut back on that and streamline these instrument sets, it's very difficult to get surgeons to change. What I found is that as soon as they are owners of this business and they have a vested interest in their bottom line, suddenly they're a lot more open to it. We actually had a program, we still have it at Zimmer Biomet, where we would take the 6 trays that were typical for a Persona knee replacement, and we were able to get that down to 2. Because we would go in and prove to these guys through kind of a Six Sigma approach. We'd have people kind of watch them in the operating room and point out all the instruments that were never touched. And then we would translate that into what it was costing them in sterilization costs, storage costs, and in many cases we were able to actually remove enough waste out of their system where they could run another operating room, which allows them to generate more revenue. So what we did was totally change the conversation and said, let's not talk about implant pricing. Let's talk about how we can help you run a more efficient ASC. And that seemed to really work. I personally believe that's the only way the ASC is going to make sense for the vendor, selfishly speaking, because we can't just take implant price reductions while we add the cost of inventory to service a surgeon who's now operating in multiple locations. So it's totally doable. I actually think it's a really fun problem to solve because it requires a different mindset. And I think when we could bring those solutions to these customers, the aha moment went on. And as long as you're targeting the right ASC owners that have a vested interest in this, it's kind of refreshing because they're thinking more like business people than I want this implant and I'm going to keep hammering you on a price reduction. So I think there's opportunity there.
Got it. And it looks, I think we just have a minute or two left. This is maybe for anybody on the panel. Something that you've been talking about here is interesting to me, and I got this so wrong with Mako. I never thought there was really utility to the robots, and to Eric's point, they're just putting pedicle screws in. I've been wrong. There's this big consumer component to robots, and I want my knee done on a robot. How important is it when you're thinking about new technologies and new implants? Is it to think about the consumer side of things that may not be completely, make a ton of sense, maybe from a business perspective? How do you layer in a consumer that's coming in now saying, I want my, spine case done in an ASC setting? How do you think about that dynamic?
It's reality. It's absolute reality. The consumer, the patient has to be part of the discussion. Technology has enabled that. They do more research. They're aware of options, and I think you have to factor that into your digital marketing strategy. That person, that potential patient, is going to see this information, and it's going to take them down a path where they investigate. So it's reality. You're still making the product for the surgeon user, but there's another consumer who's going to look at it.
Got it. Any other final thoughts before we finish up here? All right, I think we're good, and I think we're all out of time. So appreciate everybody, Brady, Kurt, Rebecca, and Eric for the time this morning. Really do think there were some really helpful insights provided.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.